Paramahamsa Parivrajikacharya Ashtatara Satashi Srimad Divine Grace of Vaichanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Anantakoti Vaishnav Vrindi Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Bhagavan Ki Jai Granth Raj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bo Namo Om Vishnu Daya Vishnu Vishnu Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Cheva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudhirayet Nashtaprayasha Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopa Kumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 25, Text number 16. Aham mama bimanotaye Aham mama bimanotaye Kama lobha dibirmalai Kama lobha dibirmalai Vittam yada manasuddham Vittam yada manasuddham Adukkam asukham samam Adukkam asukham samam Aham mama bimanotaye Kama lobha dibirmalai Vittam yada manasuddham Adukkam asukham samam Aham mama bimanotaye Kama lobha dibirmalai Vittam yada mano Vittam yada mana suddham Adukkam asukham samam Aham mama bimanotaye Kama lobha dibirmalai Vittam yada mana suddham Adukkam asukham samam Aham mama bimanotaye Kama lobha dibirmalai Vittam yada mana suddham Adukkam asukham saramam Aham mama bimanotaye Kama lobha dibirmalai Vittam yada mana sukham Adukkam asukham samam. Mataji. Aham mama bimanotaye Kama lobha dibirmalai Vittam yada mana suddham adukam asukam samam. Word for word, aham, I, mama, mine, abhimana, from the misconception, utaihi, produced, kama, lust, lobha, greed, adibihi, and so on, malaihi, from the impurities, vittam, freed, yada, when, manaha, the mind, shuddham, pure, adukkam, without distress, asukam, without happiness, samam, equipoised. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Abhay Charnaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: when one is completely cleansed of the impurities of lust and greed, produced from the false identification of the body as I, and bodily possessions as mine, one's mind becomes purified. In that pure state, he transcends the stage of so-called material happiness and distress. Purport: Kama and Lobha are the symptoms of material existence. Everyone always desires to possess something. It is said here that desire and greed are the products of false identification of oneself with the body. When one becomes free from this contamination, then his mind and consciousness also become freed and attain their original state. Mind, consciousness, and the living entity exist. Whenever we speak of the living entity, this includes the mind and consciousness. The difference between conditional life and liberated life occurs when we purify the mind and the consciousness. When they are purified, one becomes transcendental to material happiness and distress. In the beginning, Lord Kapila has said that perfect yoga enables one to transcend the platform of material distress and happiness. How this can be done is explained here. One has to purify his mind and consciousness. This can be done by the Bhakti Yoga system. As explained in the Narada Pancharatra, one's mind and senses should be purified. Tat paratvena nirmalam. One's senses must be engaged in devotional service to the Lord. That is the process. The mind must have some engagement. One cannot make the mind vacant. Of course, there are some foolish attempts to try to make the mind vacant or void, but that is not possible. The only process that will purify the mind is to engage it in Krishna. The mind must be engaged. If we engage our mind in Krishna, naturally the consciousness becomes purified and there is no chance for the entrance of material desire and greed. Translation again: when one is completely cleansed of the impurities of lust and greed, produced from false identification of the body as I and bodily possessions as mine, one's mind becomes purified. In that pure state, he transcends the stage of so-called material happiness and distress. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padhan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Mukham Karoti Vachalam Pongam Langayate Girim Yat Kripatamaham Vande Shri Gurun Dirtharam Varmanandama. Hare Krishna. So, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 25, The Glories of Devotional Service, text number 16. And we're beginning the instructions of Lord Kapiladev to his mother, Srimati Devahuti. So, in this verse, we're hearing about how when one is completely cleansed of lust and greed, then one's mind becomes purified. And what is the source of the lust and greed? It's due to aham mameti, or the false identification as the body as I, and bodily possession as mine. So naturally, when one gives up this false ego, or this false identification with the body and one's possessions, then one's mind becomes purified. And in that purified state, Kapiladev says that one transcends the so-called material happiness and distress. So, we are hardwired to enjoy material nature, and we are hardwired to try and avoid the distress. So when we hear of avoiding happiness and distress altogether, then naturally it should bring about the question, then how do I actually enjoy? Because if you're going to negate my happiness, if you're going to negate my distress, then what exactly am I going to feel? So therefore, Prabhupada has translated asukam, adukam as material happiness and material distress. And this is a very fundamental principle of Krishna consciousness, that this happiness and distress we experience through the body and the senses, the material body and the material senses, they're temporary and they're illusory. In other words, such happiness and distress do not really exist, but they're simply a mental concoction arising from false identification with the body. So we hear that verse, Manoratena asato dhavato bihi, that Prahlad Maharaj prays that the devotees of the Lord, they have all the good qualities of the demigods. Whereas those persons who so-called profess to have good qualities, what good qualities do they actually have if their mind is hovering on the mental platform? What that means is that a materialistic person may look like to be such a great person, such a wonderful person full of qualities, characteristics. But unfortunately, all those characteristics and qualities are all based on a shaky platform, which is their mind. And what that means is that today they may be all good, but tomorrow they'll be completely flipped over. It'll be a flip-flop. Today is good, tomorrow is bad. And their mood and their character completely change. Prabhupada gives the example of how there was one person who entered a village, and he was a scholar, and he could speak many different languages. And so when he appeared in front of many people, he started speaking different languages. Everyone glorified him. Look, wow, wonderful person. He's able to speak different languages. So then people sort of questioned, so what is his actual language? What is his mother tongue? And so one of the wise persons said that the best way to find out what his mother tongue is by hitting him. Because when you hit in that distressful circumstance, then what actually is within the core of the heart in terms of his mother tongue will come out. And so when they hit him, of course, the colorful language came out in his mother tongue, and everyone knew where he's from, what his mother tongue is. So the point of that analogy I'm putting forward is that to explain that we do not know what the characteristic of a person is unless they're put to test. So in this material world, when we go through material happiness and distress, we will continually go through a cycle of ups and downs, lefts and rights. We will see people go through different circumstances, and their character, their qualities will be put to test. And in the most distressful situation, that is the biggest test. And it's no different for a devotee. But I'll come back to that later. Here we're seeing things purely from the materialistic point of view, because that's what we're most attached to. Right? Because we want to enjoy. We are hardwired to enjoy. Hardwired means we are helplessly. Queen Kunti prays, let my mind be hopelessly drawn to you, just like the Ganges is hopelessly flowing towards the river. So she's praying to Krishna that she wants to be attached to him She's already attached, but she's, by example, explaining her attachment or wanting to be attached to Krishna's lotus feet. But our situation is that we want to be the other way around, right? We want our mind to be flowing in the opposite direction, from the ocean back up to the beginning of the Ganges. Our consciousness is that we want to enjoy separate from Krishna. And that's what's hardwired within our consciousness, this desire to enjoy through the senses. And if you actually analyze it, it's very fearful, it's scary, and it's very confronting. But if you sit down and think about it, at every single moment, our karmendriyas, our gyanendriyas, rather our gyanendriyas are constantly bombarding us with information. What I mean by the gyanendriyas is the knowledge acquiring senses. The knowledge acquiring senses, does anyone know who they are, what they are? The eyes, ears, nose. So you smell the prasadam, right? Yeah. Eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin. So there are karma indriyas, or rather are gyan indriyas, the indriyas or the senses in which we do to acquire knowledge. But here's the funny thing, they seem to be always switched on. Right? Even when we sleep, subtly they're always switched on, because they constantly display aversion and attachment within our dreams as well. But we'll go down to a more gross level we can appreciate. You can understand at every moment that when we see an object, we immediately think, how can I use this to enjoy? It's a standard template for everyone. That as soon as we see an object, we think, how can I enjoy? What benefit will it give me? Acceptance and rejection is based on that. And that's the function of the mind. The function of the mind is to accept and reject. And the function of the intelligence is to ratify or to control or to monitor or to regulate such acceptance and rejection. So either you have a material consciousness, or a material intelligence, which says, the mind says this is good, that's bad, that's not good, that's bad. Take for example, it's probably a good idea to sleep at night early, so that you can wake up early and perform your activities the next day, right? But what is it that stops us from doing that activity? Of course, we're all regulated here, we're all practicing Krishna consciousness, but in the material context, what stops? It's generally the mind, because what happens is the mind rejects such austerity, so-called austerity of sleeping early, and accepts the ease of enjoying the night, right? Enjoying the pleasures of the so-called pleasures of the night. So the intelligence is supposed to reject that proposal and then accept what is good for the body and the mind on the material platform. For us devotees, we develop spiritual intelligence. What that means is that everything is in relation to Krishna. Krishna, Sukha, Hetu. What gives Krishna pleasure the most? And we go through the regulative process of devotional service to be able to attain that revived state of consciousness where we constantly think of only Krishna's senses and His pleasure, not ours. So you can see the complete opposite. It's a complete flip. From our senses, constantly our senses, me, my senses, how will I benefit? How will I enjoy? Where is the sukha and where can I avoid the dukkha? Constantly going through that process, flipping that over to constantly giving Krishna pleasure, regardless of what one gets. It's a complete paradigm shift. It's very, very difficult to understand unless one's mind is cleansed of the false ego. Right? So if you go out to the street now, the first person you meet, and you tell them, look, you're not the body, you're the soul, and you're supposed to worship Krishna. And you're supposed to give Him pleasure. So immediately it's like a challenge to the face of the person. Because the whole conception of life is, how can I get enjoyment? And from this desire of how can I get enjoyment, it's nothing no different than kama or lust or the desire to enjoy the senses separate from Krishna. And lobha, greed. There's kama, lobha and krodha. 3 things. And they all begin with one thing, and that's the desire to enjoy. That desire to enjoy begins with dhayato vishyan pumsa. We begin with contemplation on the objects of the senses. Again, I'm coming back to the same point. Our body, our mind, our senses is geared to constantly think about how we can get enjoyment at this very moment. And what does that mean? It means contemplation, constant contemplation of what the senses bring in. So whatever I see, it gets registered within the consciousness, and I constantly meditate or contemplate. Does it give me happiness? Does it give me distress? If it gives me happiness, I'll store it, I'll keep it. If it gives me distress, then I'll try and reject it, forget it. Dayato Vishyan Pumsa Sangaste Supajayate. In this way, we associate with the modes of nature appearing in the objects as objects of enjoyment. Sangaste Supajayate, Sangat Sanjayate Kama, Kama Krodha Vijayate. Then we develop a lust, a hankering to enjoy. When that hankering or desire to enjoy is not satisfied, what happens? Anger, frustration. We develop this aversion. Why can't I enjoy? Why am I not able to enjoy? So that's the krodha that's mentioned. But here lobha is mentioned. This lobha is the other end of the spectrum. Because when you get what you want, you're not satisfied. You want more. You want more and you want more. So my Guru Maharaj gives the example that just like how we have the example of two birds in the tree, right? From the Svetasvatara Upanishad, I think, or Mukunda Upanishad, I've forgotten. That it's mentioned that the Paramatma, our body is a tree, and the two birds are the Paramatma and the soul. The super soul and the individual, insignificant part and parcel of the Lord, the Jivatma. So just like we have those two personalities on the tree, the materialists, they understand that in this material world, there are two things that are highly sought after. Does anyone know? Can guess? Money, okay. Pleasure, that's the main thing, this satisfaction. And there's one more. In relationship to greed. Yeah, okay. But when you get that, what do you feel? Satisfaction. Are you sure? It's actually, you feel like you want more and more and more. So, hankering. So you got these two birds sitting on the tree. This desire to be satisfied and this constant hankering that you have to satiate. And it's mentioned that these materialists mention that if you have what you need, you should be satisfied and your hankering should cease. But actually, it doesn't happen that way. What happens is that although the more bird sits on the tree, the bird of satisfaction has disappeared. It has flown away. Regardless of getting more and more and more, we're not satisfied. We're deeply distressed at heart. Because it doesn't satisfy the real identity or the real purpose in life. It doesn't satisfy us, the pure living entity, the spirit soul. So these are the symptoms of material existence, kama and lobha. And of course, Krishna mentions that this kama, krodha, lobha, they're the gateways to hell. So if we're unable to control our senses, then it's a fast ticket to the hellish planetary systems. Of course, as devotees, the consciousness is that wherever we are in material existence, that we are ready to serve Shri Shri Radha Gopinath. That's the consciousness of a devotee. Whereas the consciousness of a materialist is that out of pride and arrogance, wherever I am in the material world, what's the modus operandi? What's the consciousness? I'll be ready to enjoy. It doesn't matter where I am, I'll make efforts and I'll be able to enjoy. So this consciousness is wrong. And Prabhupada is saying here that it's natural to have this consciousness because it arises from the desire to enjoy. And Krishna enjoys. He also desires to enjoy. Anandamaya Bhyasat. So Prabhupada explains often that Krishna, because the desire to enjoy is with Krishna, because we are part and parcel of Krishna, what does that mean? We also desire to enjoy. We are also Anandamaya Bhyasat. But the problem is that we are trying to enjoy in the perverted reflection. We're not trying to enjoy in the pure state of consciousness. So this is like another slap for us, because what it means is that we're not intelligently trying to enjoy. Right? We're not using our intelligence to enjoy. Because if you really used your intelligence to enjoy, you would be enjoying. You wouldn't suffer. Rather, we just simply take whatever, have you heard this, what Prabhupada says? We are blinded by the glare of Maya. Have you heard of that if you read Prabhupada's books and Prabhupada's lectures, you'll hear, blinded by the glare of Maya. You know, when you drive in the street and the sun hits a building or another car, and that sudden reflection sort of blinds you, and while you're driving, for that moment, you don't know where you're driving. Have you experienced that? Or when you're going down a particular situation, the sun is situated in the horizon in such a way you think you just had to be there, you know, and you have to cover and you have to try and get through. Or even to the extent that nowadays we see, you know, all these cars with the LED driving lights. Some of them are so strong that, you know, when you look in your mirror, it's like you see the Brahma Jyoti is appearing there, right? So this is the glare. This is what they call as a glare. It's usually from a reflection. And this glare blinds us from seeing what we actually have to do. So the illusion Maya creates bewilders us. What's the illusion? She presents on a plate this proposal of happiness in the material world, which doesn't really exist. Her functions are two. She covers the living entity and she drags the living entity down. What does that mean? She covers the living entity means that she makes the living entity forget their original constitutional position. And when she drags them down, that forgetfulness causes such contaminated consciousness, they forget even more, further and further. There's no option for them to come out. And I like to remember this in terms of you know, when you see the mafia movies, you know, when the mafia comes and they pick up their, you know, the victim, right? And when they pick up the victim, they bash him black and blue, and then they cover his head or her head and take them somewhere far away, right? And then they let them, like they say, sleep with the fishies, yeah? So what does that mean? It means that they're covered, they're taken to a place where even if they're uncovered, they don't know how to recover from. They don't know how to go back. And then they're thrown in the ocean to swim with the fishies. Means that, again, samsara, birth and death, birth and death. They don't know how to get out. So in the same way, material nature, she's very powerful. She makes us forget who we are, and she makes us accept who we're not. And in this way, we transmigrate from one body to another, seeking so-called happiness and distress. But when one becomes free from this contamination, then one is able to understand one's nature as Aham Brahmasmi. Jivara Surupa Hoy, Krishna Nityadas. So, what is the essence then? What's that one point? What is that one thing we can do? Like Prabhupada says, you know, Krishna consciousness is that one light switch which everything becomes illuminated, right? This is darkness and material existence. If you just switch on that one switch of Krishna consciousness, you'll understand everything. In the same way, what is that one thing we can do that will help us, you know, overcome this birth and death, this constant transmigration, this constant hankering and distress, this insatiable hankering and the distress that comes from not being able to get what we want. What's that one thing we can do? Prabhupada says that when we purify the mind and consciousness, naturally everything will be back to order. Back to order. How is that? And Prabhupada gives it's a classic response from Prabhupada, that if you're engaged, your mind and senses in Krishna, you'll naturally become Krishna conscious, right? And if you want to see it in a technical perspective, Krishna explains in the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita that the senses are superior to the body, superior to the senses is the mind, superior to the mind is the intelligence, and the next door neighbor, the soul, is superior to the intelligence. So if you go towards trying to conquer the mind from either direction, it's a good start. The yogis try to go from the senses up. So what they do? Ashtanga yoga. Yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyadhara, dharana, samadhi. Right? They go in the opposite direction. They can try to control the senses to get to the mind. Whereas the bhakti yogi understands that we need to first understand the self. Once you understand who you are, then with the help of Krishna, who's the master of the senses, we can control the mind. So therefore, Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita that in one sense, because the goal is the same to get to Krishna consciousness, Sankhya Yoga and Karma Yoga, they're in one sense the same thing. right? I was listening to one lecture, Bombay Morning Walk, and there one disciple of Prabhupada was explaining to Dr. Patel that what is karma yoga, because someone asked what is karma yoga, and so he's explaining to the entourage there that when you perform activity for oneself, that's just karma, but when you perform activities for Krishna, that's karma yoga. And Prabhupada says that's not different from bhakti. And one disciple actually asked Prabhupada, so karma yoga is better than bhakti yoga? And Prabhupada says yes. And they get completely bewildered, because you understand all the disciples are just shocked, and they continue the conversation. Again, they bring it up to Prabhupada later, like further down, because they know if they immediately ask, then Prabhupada will go heavy on them. So he asks, another disciple asks Prabhupada again, and I'm going to paraphrase because I can't remember exactly. So then he was pretty much probing Prabhupada, asking, so if one performs karma yoga, does that mean that one's the topmost devotee? One is, one is performing bhakti yoga automatically? And then Prabhupada says, he explains to them that karma yoga means to do everything for Krishna. So that is naturally bhakti yoga. And seeing the confusion in his disciples, then he says that, don't try to jump and try to understand this immediately. You will understand gradually. So there are two things you can understand here. One is that when one performs devotional service, karma yoga, you see there's a difference between the karma yoga mentioned in the 3rd chapter and the karma yoga mentioned in the 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. The karma yoga in Krishna consciousness, that is non-different from bhakti. On a very high level, of course, there are you can go into the intricacies and really pick it apart. But on the high level, it's like this. But karma yoga meant just simply to satisfy the senses, but still understanding there's some supreme out there. That's not really bhakti. It's on the way to bhakti, but it's not quite bhakti yet. Because bhakti means anya abilishta sunyam jnana karmadina avritam. Right? Rupa Goswami mentions. That is pure bhakti. So the reason why I'm coming to that is because karma yoga, performing activities to be able to control the mind and to offer one's result to Krishna, is a way of controlling the mind and senses. Because you become regulated. Because Krishna doesn't accept anything and everything, right? He accepts what he wants, and you have to give him what he wants. So naturally one comes to the platform of being regulated and doing whatever Krishna wants. So naturally one will come to bhakti, right? Bhakti means doing whatever Krishna wants. So here, tatparatvena nirmalam. Sarvapadi vinirmuktam tatparatvena nirmalam rishikena rishikesha sevanam bhakti ruchyate. So this one also, and there's another one that always goes in tandem. Atashi Krishna namari na bhavet grayam indriye sevanmukhi hi jivado swayameva spuratyada. That Narada Pancharatra mentions that sarvapadi vinirmuktam, one gives up the upadi, vinirmuktam. Sarva upadi vinirmuktam, gives up all types of upadi. What does upadi mean? Upadi means the false designations that we have accepted. As Prabhupada says, I am black, you are black, you are white, Indian, American, male, female, all of these things. You give up all of that, tatparatvena nirmalam, come to the pure platform. And what is that pure platform? Nirmalam, understanding oneself as a servant of the Lord. Then naturally rishikena rishikesha sevanam bhakti ruchyate. Then in that consciousness, when you perform devotional service to satisfy Krishna's senses, that is called bhakti. Then there's another step you can take forward, that atashi Krishna namari na bhavet grayam indriye sevanmukhi hi jivado swayameva spuratyada. That same service, rishikena rishikesha sevanam, that service will enable you to be able to understand Krishna. Otherwise, with your blunt material senses, blunt material senses means that as we are now without Krishna consciousness, we cannot understand Krishna. It's not possible. But by engaging the tongue, atashi Krishna namadi na bhavet grayam indriye sevanmukhi hi jivado swayameva spuratyada, then naturally we can understand Krishna beginning with his name. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So if you read the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, in the purports throughout that 8th chapter, Prabhupada hammers on this point, on chanting the holy name of the Lord, and purifying one's consciousness. And by doing that, one will be able to attain Krishna at the end of one's life. Yo mam smarati nityasa. By doing that, one will attain Krishna's lotus feet. So you cannot make the mind vacant. So here's the next point I wanted to mention. So okay, we can't have material happiness and distress. And so what are we supposed to have? Right? When you're in material existence, many of you would have experienced before coming to Krishna consciousness, that there's this point where you just feel like, if I'm going to be happy and I'm going to be sad as well, I just don't want either of them. It's just such a headache, such anxiety it causes. I don't want anything to do with happiness and distress. It becomes, renunciation, so-called renunciation, vairagya, bhoga, tyag. You want to enjoy like anything, and you want to renounce like anything. And so like a pendulum, you swing from one side to the other. But somehow at one point in time, you get to a point where I don't want anything at all. There's got to be something more to life. Because it just so happens that I get happiness, and within that happiness, I get distress immediately. So that's why Narad Muni explains to Vyasadeva that an intelligent person who knows that whether one goes to the highest planetary system, to Brahmaloka, or even down to the lowest, they know that happiness and distress exists in all platforms. Wherever there's happiness, distress will come of its own accord. Material happiness, material distress. It'll come of its own accord. So then what does that mean? Give up everything? Let's just give it up altogether. I don't exist, happiness doesn't exist, distress doesn't exist, forget everything. Just void. Nullify everything out of frustration. Prabhupada explains that as well in the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, that he's explaining Vitaraga Bhaya Krodha Manmaya Mam Upashitaha Bhavo Jnana Tapasa Putamad Bhavamagataha. In that Prabhupada dissects Vitaraga Bhaya Krodha. So Raga, Bhaya and Krodha. What is this Raga? Attachment. Vitaraga Bhaya Krodha. So that attachment is attachment to the material body. And Prabhupada says in the purport, when you go to a person and say, my dear friend, that you are not the body or the soul, they won't accept it. Because they're so attached to the body, out of fear. I don't know anything else. All I know is enjoyment of the senses. What are you trying to profess? What are you trying to preach? Vitaraga Bhaya. Then comes this fear. That if you say that, there's spiritual life, there's spiritual senses, there's spiritual relationships, again there'll be distress, again there'll be happiness, again I'll go through the whole thing. I'm scared of that. I don't want to go through these difficulties again. So better avoid everything, nothing. Vitaraga Bhaya Krodha. And then comes anger. Anger because it arises from frustration. And what does Prabhupada say that frustration arises from? All these false doctrines of so-called spirituality that we learn from false pseudo-gurus, pseudo-yogis. That nothing, this material world is just simply illusion. The spiritual world doesn't exist. It's just everything is void. And one follows that profession, naturally one becomes frustrated in life even more. Right? Frustrated because they weren't able to enjoy in the first place, and frustrated that when they took shelter of something that will help them, overcome that, they got cheated. So frustration comes from there as well. So double the frustration. Vitaraga Bhaya Krodha. So Prabhupada, in that purport, mentions this 3 times. These 3 definitions or these 3 explanations, he mentions in 3 different paragraphs in 3 different ways. So it's very important for us to understand. It's like a progression gradually from attachment to fear to anger. So naturally in material existence we'll feel like that. If someone says transcends the stage of so-called material happiness, distress, what comes to the mind? If we didn't come in contact with Prabhupada, because since the beginning Prabhupada's hammering, Nirguna means spiritual qualities, not no qualities. Prabhupada hammers from the beginning. The very essence of the Vedas that's so difficult, that escapes even the yogis that are performing their tapasya and yoga for so many years. Prabhupada says, right, for a devotee, we just come and see the deities. Shri Shri Radha Gopinath are there. But the yogis, they try so hard looking within the core of their heart. So who's superior? The yogis or the devotees? Even a person who just comes off the street and sees the deities is superior than the Ashtanga yogis. That's how powerful devotional service is. Right? So Prabhupada hammers that from the beginning. You're not the body or the soul. Your enjoyment is in Krishna's enjoyment. You cannot be vacant. The mind cannot be vacant. That's not the solution. All these things are coming to the mind. The solution is not, let me get rid of everything. That's duality of material existence. It doesn't work. Yesham tvantagatam papam jananam punya karmanam te dvanda moha nirmukta bhajante mam dhridavrta. There, Krishna mentions that those who are sinful in nature, for them the Juda Bhakti, the determination to perform devotional service does not come. Rather, one who performs pious activities, and this pious activities means devotional service, not pious activities in terms of, activities for so-called, general religious principles. So what is what's Krishna saying there? When one performs such pious activities, naturally one te dvanda moha nirmukta, one's able to overcome dualities. So that's what Prabhupada's Kapila Dev is mentioning here. When one comes to Krishna consciousness, material happiness and distress no longer matter, because they enjoy devotional service, the mellows of devotional service. So if we engage our mind in Krishna, naturally the consciousness becomes purified, and there's no chance of the entrance of material desire and greed. And so the gateway to hell is closed, and we're able to attain the spiritual kingdom of God. So, that pretty much covers the purport. Are there any comments or questions? Yes, Mataji. Mm.
And just a little bit you relax, straight away your mind just won't enjoy, right? And whereas we know whereas even find power to just control the mind, like read more books, like do this, do that. Mm-hmm. But still, every time you have to make a decision, you have to be alert, you have to be strong, you have to engage in intelligence and so on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
But and as I understand, it's deeply lack of understanding who we are. And I want to ask how we really understand the Anatman Buddha, like how we really step forward deeper to understand this. I think it's because deep still we don't. Mm. That's why as soon as you really relax.
Yeah, yeah.
The experience is, and it's meaning we don't understand because it's theory, but you're acting as a body.
Yeah.
Your mind is grabbing all the time.
Mm-hmm. So the question is that how can we develop a deeper understanding? Actually, when you were speaking, so many answers came, and then as soon as you stopped, nothing came. Okay, the classic answer to this question is in relationship to how we constantly slip, not fall down, but slip. We slip, we get back up, we slip, we get back up. Fall down means you don't get back up. But slipping and getting back up to speed, the common solution for that is to take stronger association of devotees, to practice devotional service in the association of devotees. So that means increasing somehow or other your quota of association of devotees, which means coming for Mangalarti as much as possible, or whatever morning program you can, online if you have to. Of course, online doesn't get the same benefit as in person. Or coming to the temple in the evening, making your family Krishna conscious so that they're also associates, they can associate with them. In fact, if you want to go one step further, some devotees are very fortunate that they're able to meet devotees at work, right? I remember once when I came to Krishna consciousness, I remember a couple of the Prabhus, they were working together in one project in the government, and each one of them was talking about the other and how each one was spacing out, reading, chanting, and doing things like work. And I remember they used to have nicknames for their bosses, and one was called Duryodhana and one was called Dhritarashtra. And they used to say that, oh, quick, get back to work, Duryodhana's coming. So some people have that, some people make that opportunity to have association in that sense at work. I remember some devotees meet up at lunch during work, call phone calls. I remember some preachers also run classes to their people. Of course, they're exalted souls, right? They've understood. But I found, especially when I was working or living outside of the association, I have to make clarification that even sometimes doing devotional service, you just go somewhere else. What does Krishna say? That when one of the senses, even one of the roaming senses can drag. So whether it may be, we're working outside or we're doing some sort of devotional service, it's association of devotees. That's the classic general answer to that question. Take more association of devotees, because by the association of devotees, naturally we will act on the platform of devotional service. By acting on the platform of devotional service, we are reprogramming the way we work physically, and Krishna is working subtly.
It's mean like we kind of programming and like drug our mind to engage in this. But it's for me it's like kind of should be something deeper to understand even who I am. It's like it's different level than mind. Like we engage mind in
Yes.
but really understand
Yep.
who they are. It's a bit like I think deeper level. Right?
Yes, so that deeper level you're talking about is mentioned in 11th canto, that Pareshanubhava Viraktiranyatacha. That Uddhava explains, Krishna explains to Uddhava, that just like when you take food, one becomes nourished, right? There's no more hunger and one's satisfied. So by performing devotional service, naturally tushti, pushti, sudhapayo, right? So one is tushti, one is satisfied, pushti, one becomes nourished, sudhapayo, then that desire and hankering, that go away. But I think the acharyas mentioned one step further, that one hankers more and more for devotional service after that. That's the only difference in that example. Whereas when you eat, you feel satisfied, no more eating. Whereas with devotional service, you feel satisfied, but simultaneously you desire more and more and more. So that aspect of experience by performing devotional service, that vijnana comes by practice, right? It's not something that we can simply get by reading. That doesn't come simply by theoretical knowledge, it's by practice. So when we practice devotional service, that experience of Krishna, that reciprocation we get from Krishna, that solidifies our devotional service. Now, not necessarily understanding that we are the body constantly. Of course, that's what we constantly have to think of. Prabhupada says, when he was explaining to his disciples, I think it was a morning walk, that he was giving an example of the difference between the body and the soul. And then suddenly at one stage Prabhupada stopped and he looked at his disciples and said, do you know how I'm able to give so many examples? It's because I'm constantly thinking about this, how I can explain. So Prabhupada was teaching by examples to his disciple. He's teaching by example to his disciples and us. That we have to constantly bring the mind back. So what we're talking about is the ultimate level, or the level we want to achieve, where the mind is constantly absorbed in Krishna. Like Shyam Sundar Prabhu asks Prabhupada, when a pure devotee sees Krishna everywhere, does that mean he sees Krishna here, Krishna there, Krishna is in the tree, Krishna is there? Prabhupada says, no. You see this? Whose shoes is this? This is yours, Prabhupada. So when you see these shoes, what do you think of? I think of, it's yours, Prabhupada. So same way, when a mother thinks of the child's shoe, the child isn't there, but they'll think the child, right? So in the same way, a pure devotee will see everything as Krishna's, and will see Krishna everywhere in that sense. That's what we want to attain. And our position right now is that we are sometimes Krishna conscious, right? I think a devotee asked Prabhupada, that Prabhupada, how come it's that, we're in Krishna consciousness, sometimes we go into Maya. And Prabhupada says, sometimes? You're always in Maya. Sometimes you're Krishna conscious. So that's our situation actually. Our situation is like that. Prabhupada's making it very clear. We're starting from the lowest level in Kali Yuga. Technically speaking, Atma Gyan should not be given in this age. Understanding of the body, the soul separate from the body is not a normal, regular thing. But by Mahaprabhu's mercy, we're getting an option to, go straight to the top level. Because Mahaprabhu is giving us the holy name, the end goal. We chant to chant more, right? So, how do we get to that platform? We need to understand something. Prabhupada explains that first example I told you about the muscle, or rather the experience. By experiencing Krishna consciousness, gradually we develop a taste, and we don't let that go. Okay, I'll explain this point fully first, because the next one I was going to explain is a choice muscle. You must have heard of that before. But before coming to the choice muscle, here's something that is common sense, but we forget it. Whatever experiences that we get from Krishna, we need to protect. Whatever devotional service we get from Krishna, we need to protect. And what I mean by protect is that we should not be complacent. We should not take it lightly. We should protect what we get from Krishna. Just like when we get material, when you go out and enjoy a vacation, we'll take pictures. We'll try to protect that memory. Try to live it long-lasting for the rest of our life, right? Because when I look back, those great times, like that. In devotional service, we need to do that. But it's not, it was great times. You'll experience the ecstasy right now. Prabhupada says, the same ecstasy that the pure devotees are experiencing in Krishna Lila right now, you have access to it. So the ecstasies that the devotees have in relationship with Radha Gopinath, on the pure platform, you have access to that right now. Yeah.
If we do genuinely devotional service with proper mood, service mood,
Yep.
then Krishna reciprocate and you feel
Yes.
Krishna exists,
Yes.
Krishna real.
Yes.
You feel it, he is in the heart, it's real, it's not fairy already, yeah? Then you just, as much as you have this experience, you more and more understand your spiritual soul.
Yeah, that's where I'm coming to, yeah. Yeah.
No.
No. That's where I was coming to. The point that
Still we have very short, very tiny experience, but we, as much as we just maybe need to purify our mood, our consciousness
Yep.
by proper.
Yep.
When we do services,
Yep.
we said that we can just thinking something else.
Yep.
We should do proper mood to set and then go to devotional service.
Yep.
And then you will feel more and more deeper.
Yeah, so when you pretty much took what. Yeah, no, you took the crux of it. The point I was trying to mention is when we talk about protecting, not being lighthearted, not being complacent, it means when our consciousness is, like a sponge. We're ready to accept. When we come to Krishna consciousness, everyone's a pure devotee. Everything they say about Krishna, we're ready to just absorb and accept, right? Because our consciousness is of somewhat a humble nature, a mood of humility. Right? A mood of gratitude that I was suffering so much, somehow or other I'm getting this knowledge. It's like an innate nature we naturally accept and absorb. But over a period of time, if we don't protect that nature, if we don't protect what Krishna gives us, then we become a bit hard-hearted at times. Then when we become hard-hearted, then we won't be able to understand how fortunate, not lucky, but how fortunate we are. The fortune created by Prabhupada to be able to chant the holy names, to be able to do any service. And you develop that gratitude and that humility, naturally Krishna becomes sold out. And Krishna will force himself into your consciousness because he wants to associate with you more and more. There's something we don't realize, that when we chant Hare Krishna, Prabhupada says two things. And he says many things, but two things in terms of direct association with Krishna is when you chant Hare Krishna, what does Prabhupada say about the tongue? Krishna and Srimati Radharani are directly dancing on your tongue. But we just take that as, figurative language. So, yeah, my tongue, I can't see, I can't see them dancing. But they are dancing. Prabhupada says, the flute, the sound of Krishna's flute is the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Right? I remember, it's embarrassing, but I guess I'll put the point forward. 2 times I was living in the temple, 2 times. Once late night, I remember, the temple is locked, everything is dark. I was coming from the kitchen, going upstairs, and I heard a flute. And so, so in in my arrogant consciousness still there, I was saying, wow, something's happening in the temple room. And I was like, Krishna's dancing, I gotta go, he's calling. I open the temple room, it's pitch black. I was like, what's happening here? And then I remember Ganesham Prabhu tapping my shoulder. Prabhu, don't worry, it's not gonna happen to you now. Actually, what was happening was Kishore Prabhu was playing the flute upstairs in the rooms. And it was going down through all the temple and you could hear that. So you think, the flute, when the flute happens, when I hear the flute, that means Krishna's dancing Rasalila. But what we don't realize, it's so simple, is that when we chant Hare Krishna, Krishna's there. It is Krishna. That sound is Krishna. We need to learn not to see with the eyes but the ears. So yeah, that will only happen if we lose the arrogant nature, right? I can only see with my eyes. I can only understand with my nose, my tongue. Right? That's what the baby thinks, right? Everything in the mouth. That's how it understands the world. It's foolish when you see it, when a child does that, right? Everything in the mouth, everything. The whole world is what fits in its mouth, I can understand. It's foolish, right? This is the same way the pure devotees see us. How foolish we are, we simply understand with the eyes. Sorry, I'm just getting cramps. But yeah, how foolish we are, we accept only by seeing. For them, we're just no different from a child putting things in the mouth. So anyway, coming back to the point is, as you were mentioning, that we need to perform more devotional service and we need to perform in the right mood. And then there's another aspect, and that's called the choice muscle. My Guru Maharaj gives this example a lot. When you build a muscle, you have to constantly stretch. You have to constantly perform the same actions. It's a choice, right? Every day is a choice. You can either perform the exercise or not. If you consistently do it, you'll build the muscle. You'll develop the habit. If you don't, then you won't be able to do it long term. So in that way, we have to take advantage